After La Porchetta, I spent time working with Guy Grossi of Florentino, and my philosophy now is just a combination of the two. If the restaurant back in the day has at some point done exceptionally well, you know the business is there. When a new employee starts with us, that's the first question I'll ask them. I'll test them, say, let me ask a question. Who is the most important customer in the restaurant?
Hello and welcome back to Good Gravy, brought to you by Busboy, a show where we sit down with hospitality experts and extract actionable advice that you can apply to your venue. My name is Taylor, I'm your host, and today we're joined by Mark Natoli from Carosello in Moonee Ponds, Melbourne, Australia. I've known Mark since around 2015 and worked with him for most of that time since. And what I've picked up is that he's a very solid operator. He specialises in family-focused Italian restaurants, and I've seen him do this several times where he comes in, picks up venues that are down in their luck, buys them cheap, and then turns them around and sells them for a nice profit within a year or so. His most recent project he bought for just over $200,000 and sold it just a year and a half later for over $1 million. In this episode, we talk about how Mark sets his restaurants up to be sold and the number one question he asks all new employees. And we also discuss what he learned working for both La Porchetta and Guy Grossi. For those perhaps outside of Australia, La Porchetta is it's an Australian Italian chain that was massive in the 90s and early 2000s, while Guy Grossi is more upmarket. It's headed by Guy Grossi. He's got Grossi Florentinos in Melbourne, among other venues. And then in the 90s, he was awarded by the Italian president for promoting Italian cooking. So they're both two very contrasting experiences. As always, if you have any questions or feedback about this episode, just send me an email at hello@goodgravy.show. And if you're feeling generous, please subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app. G'day, Mark, and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We've known each other for quite some time now. I think we started working together perhaps back in 2016, 2015. You've been very successful with the restaurants you've opened and some of which that you've sold. Let's just start by giving me a quick overview of what it is you do and the restaurants you manage.
So essentially, I buy existing restaurants. I look for restaurants that aren't being managed well or running very successfully, and just try and convert them into profitable, fun, energetic restaurants, and take them probably take them as far as I can take them, and then, like anyone says, get in at the low and get out at the high, take them to a level and then sell them.
Each restaurant is a step up from the previous one, and a lot of them stay consistent with the menu.
Yep.
And then there's little tweaks in every one you open.
Yep.
Why have you decided to keep the menu relatively the same across all of your venues?
I think the short answer to that is safety. So we've developed a concept over many years. We know we're comfortable and confident that concept's going to work, provided we purchase the right restaurant in the beginning. And so generally, if you look at the restaurants I've bought and sold, they're very similar. So they're suburban restaurants, they're 100+ seater restaurants, obviously Italian, family-friendly, main road exposure, plenty of parking. So you find the right venue, and we know that the concept is the menu, or the menu is the concept. I mean, if I was to open a restaurant with a completely different menu, I think I'd have to start from scratch and it'd take me a lot longer to turn that restaurant into something that can be sold for $1 million+ in a short amount of time.
And I'm sure there's also benefits. You don't have to train new cooks. Cooks
Yep.
can work in both restaurants if they want.
Yep.
And then you've also got pre-existing relationships with suppliers as well.
Yeah.
So you already know what you need. So where did you start? What is it that got you started in hospitality?
Okay, so I finished high school, local St. Bernard's in Essendon, and didn't do too well. One of the reasons I didn't do too well at high school is because I was working part-time nights and weekends when I probably should have been studying. And I was working at a La Porchetta, which was a family friend who owned La Porchetta out in Williamstown. And I was more focused on working and making money than I was at schoolwork. But when I finished year 12, my score was just good enough to be able to get into hospitality. And I thought, well, this is great. I'm already in the industry. I can study hospitality and refine my skills. And it's almost like it was always meant to be. And looking back, I learned my time at La Porchetta. I was probably there for about 5 or 6 years in total. And I learned a lot. In that time, there was nothing glamorous about La Porchetta. It was fast, cheap, big portion food. But I become part of a crew that they would, very similar to what I do now, a core group that they would send to new restaurants that would open to help hire and train the new staff. That sort of exposed me to setting up, fitting out, and starting from scratch, things that I'm still doing today. La Porchetta was very short, sharp, fast service. La Porchetta sent me to St Kilda, Frankston, Williamstown. I went to Sydney, I went to Tasmania and worked in other people's stores, and I would help hire, train, and then once it was able to stand on its own 2 feet, I would move off to the next place.
Did you ever go back to those restaurants afterwards?
Yeah.
And how were they doing?
They were okay. And the reason they were okay was because it wasn't a high level, it wasn't a high quality of food, it wasn't a high quality of service. It was a very casual environment. So it didn't take a lot. You didn't have to be an expert industry to be able to operate a La Porchetta. And the way we would set them up, and the way we would train was very user-friendly. And so the model worked. And that's why I think they opened, through the 90s, it was over 100 stores throughout Australia, because it was a simple operation.
Just a copy and paste.
Which is similar to what I do now, except every copy and paste I try to improve on the last version.
But your quality of food is better than that of La Porchetta. Like, the quality of food's better, the service is better, the fit out's better. So it's almost La Porchetta on the next level.
That comes from my time after La Porchetta. I spent time working with Guy Grossi of Florentino. I was there for about 5 years, from about 2000, 2005. And going from probably the entry-level Italian restaurant scene, I went to the top end, the pinnacle of Italian restaurant in Australia. I remember when we were there, we won the award for Australia's best Italian restaurant. And what I learned with Guy Grossi of Florentino's was how to do things properly, from service to food to they were awesome at everything. They were really good. Their attention to detail was really on point. And so taking what I learned from both La Porchetta and Grossi, I just tried to merge the two. What I learned at La Porchetta was how to serve a lot of customers very quickly. In order to do that, you need to create an environment where everyone feels comfortable. You can have one table of 10 people celebrating a family function, a really important family event. And then on the next table, you can have some kids that have just walked out of the gym, and everybody feels comfortable, because that's the environment they were able to create. At Grossi, obviously learned how to do things properly, clean up the food, proper cooking techniques, proper service. And my philosophy now is just a combination of the two. So we still create that casual dining environment, but we like to think we exceed the expectations with the quality of food and the quality of service. So you walk into a restaurant, you think we're just a run-of-the-mill suburban Italian pizzeria, but people leave pleasantly surprised.
I remember a saying you said to me early when we met. It was, the most important customer is the one walking in the door. The second most important is the one walking out the door.
When a new employee starts with us, that's the first question I'll ask them. I'll test them, say, let me ask you a question. Who is the most important customer in the restaurant? And some of the answers I've gotten over the years are unbelievable. They range from your mum to everybody to the real creative answers, but no one seems to get it right. My belief is that the most important customer is the one walking in the door. And that's because first impressions is everything. You only get one opportunity to make that first impression. If a customer walks in and he's greeted by a massive smile and he's welcoming, everything from there just seems to flow in a positive direction. Whereas if you were to walk into a restaurant and you don't know whether you should wait for them to be seated or no one's greeting you, do you go and sit down yourself? It's a little uncomfortable from the moment you walk in. And then everything from that point on becomes a little bit more difficult. It's no coincidence that all of my restaurants have the most senior front of house person is the person at the door greeting people on the way in. So you're being greeted by the most confident senior member of the team.
So you've sold several restaurants, done quite well. Yep. Do you have any tips or advice for people looking to sell? What can they do to make it more appealing? Obviously, lots of revenue is great. Is there anything else they can do to make it more appealing to the buyer?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that I did, my first restaurant, big restaurant that we sold was difficult to sell. And the reason it was difficult to sell was I was young, I was keen, I was hungry, and we were open 7 days a week, breakfast, lunch and dinner. We just wanted to get in there and make as much money as possible. It did become it was a very difficult restaurant to sell. It took a long time to sell. So my philosophy over the years has changed.
Was that because it's a pretty big thing to take on?
It's labour intensive. What we did was we refined our concept. So we actually opened less hours. Now my restaurants, when I open a restaurant, it's 6 nights, no lunch except for Sunday. So we'll close Mondays, we'll open Tuesday to Sunday dinner and Sunday lunch. We get in, we make our money, we go home. There's plenty of downtime to have that balance of life. If you put 2 restaurants up against each other for sale, they're both doing the same takings, but one's doing it in half the amount of time, which restaurant are you going to buy? It gives the purchaser that sense of not security, but it's not as daunting to take on. It's not as big a project to take on when you're only open half the amount of hours. So that's something we actively did. My first restaurant, breakfast, lunch and dinner. My second one was 7 days lunch and dinner. My third restaurant was no lunches, just 6 nights. And as you've said, they've become a lot easier to sell, and they don't stay on the market for as long.
And what about when you come to purchase a venue? I mean, you said obviously you prefer ones that are down, let's say down on their luck, not doing as well as they would like. What are you looking for in particular? Are there any red flags?
I wouldn't say red flags. More so, we're looking for boxes that they tick. I don't fit out restaurants from scratch. I'll always buy existing restaurants. If the restaurant back in the day has at some point done exceptionally well and just not doing well at the moment, then the business is there. If you do the right thing, if you clean up the food and the service, and you will do well because it's done well in the past. So that's definitely a box that we look to tick. We operate suburban restaurants, so parking is a big thing. The difference between a suburban restaurant and an inner city restaurant, if you go into the city, you'll find majority of tables are 2s or tables of 4, smaller groups. In the suburbs, you've got a lot of kids, high chairs, bigger groups, bigger families. That requires parking. So parking is something that we don't underestimate. It's quite a big thing. That's another box. Of course, there's no rules, so you don't have to tick these boxes. They just help. Yeah. So when I first take over a restaurant, I'll be there all the time, hands on, all 6 days of the week. And as the restaurant finds its feet, I'll step back and spend less and less time there, and eventually take baby steps to put the venue or the restaurant under management. That's another thing that helps when it comes time to sell. The potential purchasers see that the owners are not as required. It makes it easier to sell. If you go and you look at one of my venues and it's very dependent on me or my business partner Geordie or my chefs, who sometimes we have a chef with a bit of skin in the game who's a part owner of the business. If they see that the business is reliant on us being there, it becomes very difficult to sell. So we need to dive in head first, spend a lot of time there, then just take baby steps, work our way out of it, virtually have it under management, and then they're pretty easy to sell. They're good products.
Thanks for joining me today, Mark. If people want to learn more about you, where can they go?
Okay, they can come see me at 22 Margaret Street in Moonee Ponds, Carosello.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Good Gravy. If you have any questions or feedback, feel free to shoot me an email at hello@goodgravy.show, and make sure to subscribe in your favourite podcast app.